You cannot sleep. Not yet. The bell rang for Compline an hour ago, and the great silence fell with it, and you filed up the night stair in the dark behind the shapes of the brothers, and found your pallet, and lay down in your habit as the rule requires, and the dormitory settled around you into its nighttime breathing. And now the dormitory breathes, and you do not sleep. The cold is the reason. Not the only reason. There is also the hardness of the straw tick under your back, and the weight of the wool blanket that is not quite enough weight to feel like enough, and the unfamiliarity of this room which you have slept in for 6 nights now and not yet learned. But the cold is the first reason, the most immediate, the one that your body keeps returning to when the mind tries to release into sleep, and the body reports back. Cold. Still cold. Cold at the shoulders where the blanket has slipped. Cold along the shins where the habit has ridden up. Cold in the tip of the nose above the blanket's edge. The specific cold of a nose in winter air that is not life-threatening, but is not ignorable. You pull the blanket higher. This is the negotiation that winter sleep in a stone dormitory requires of every new monk in his first winter. The negotiation that the veteran brothers across the room have long since learned to conduct below the threshold of consciousness. The management of the single wool blanket around a sleeping body. The finding of the configuration that traps the most warmth in the fewest square feet of wool, that tucks the edges securely enough that the slow movements of sleep do not undo them, that covers the nose without covering the mouth, that keeps the feet inside the lower hem without pulling the upper edge down below the neck. The blanket is not small. It is the blanket that the rule specifies, the blanket of sufficient size for the body the rule imagines, and the rule is not unkind about the blanket. The monks in the dormitory, seen from above in the dark, would look like a row of closed brackets, each one curved in the same direction or in opposite directions, each one the same posture of the cold-adapted sleeper, the posture that the human body arrives at when cold and horizontal, in the same way that it arrives at reaching for warmth when cold and upright, automatically, without requiring a decision. The veteran brothers are already asleep. You can hear this. You can hear the difference between the breathing of a man who is sleeping and the breathing of a man who is lying in the dark not sleeping. And the room is full of the former. But it is one blanket, and one blanket in a room with no fire, at 2 in the morning, in January is working at the edge of its capacity. The body helps. This is the thing the body does that takes over from the blanket where the blanket's capacity ends. The curl. The body in the cold room draws itself in without instruction from the mind that is trying to sleep, pulls the knees toward the chest and the arms against the ribs and the chin down toward the collarbone, reducing the surface area exposed to the cold air. Concentrating the warmth generated by the metabolic processes of the sleeping body into the smallest possible volume, the body becoming its own best insulation by becoming as compact as it can be. 30 men or 40 men, depending on the community and the century, sleeping in the habit they wore all day and will wear tomorrow, on straw ticks on low wooden frame under single blanket, in a room whose windows are shuttered but not glazed, whose walls are 2 feet of dressed stone, conducting the temperature of the January earth into the air of the room, whose floor is the same stone, whose ceiling is timber above which the thatch or the lead or the stone slating does its imperfect best to slow the loss of whatever warmth the bodies below have generated. The veteran brothers have adapted. This is the central fact about sleep in the monastic dormitory that no amount of description from outside it fully conveys. The body adapts. Not in the first week, not in the first month, and not completely, ever. The cold will always be cold. The stone will always take heat from the hand that touches it. The January night will always assert its nature through whatever the building interposes between it and the body inside. But the body that has slept in this room for a year is a different body from the body you brought here in September. Different in its thermoregulatory expectations, different in what it reads as the normal nighttime temperature, different in the specific way that all bodies become different when they are given a consistent condition to inhabit over a long enough period. They learn it, not as information, as reality. The novice master told you this in October, when the cold was beginning. He did not say it to comfort you, and he did not say it to warn you of F. He said it the way he says most things, which is as a plain statement of what is. He said, "The first winter is the hardest. By the third winter, you will not remember what it was to find this cold remarkable." He has been here for 22 years, and in 22 winters, his body has recalibrated itself so thoroughly to the dormitory's temperature that he sleeps deeply and completely through the full interval between compline and vigils, rising at the bell not from a shallow, uncomfortable doze, but from genuine sleep. The sleep of a body that knows exactly what conditions it is sleeping in and has decided that those conditions are fine. You believe him. You believe him the way you believe everything he says, which is partly faith and partly evidence. The evidence being the 22 years of his body, which does not exhibit the effects of chronic sleep deprivation or chronic cold exposure, which is healthy and capable and present and clear, eyed in the mornings in a way that suggests the nights are doing their work. His body is the advertisement for what your body will eventually become if you stay. You intend to stay, but tonight is tonight. And tonight, the blanket is cold and the nose is cold, and the stone is doing what the stone does. You pull the habit's hood up over your ears. This is the first real discovery of the monk's winter sleep, and it is a discovery every novice makes independently because it seems too simple to be as effective as it is. The hood. The habit has a hood, a deep cowl that in the daytime is worn up or down depending on the office and the weather and the custom of the house. And at night, in the dormitory, in January, the hood pulled up over the head and tucked under the chin is worth more than an additional blanket in the warmth budget of the sleeping body. The head loses heat faster than any other part of the body. The skull is close to the surface here, the scalp's blood vessels generating warmth efficiently and losing it efficiently to cold air. And a head uncovered in a cold room at 2 a.m. is a radiator pointed at the ceiling, broadcasting the body's precious warmth upward into the air above the blanket where it does no good to anyone. The hood changes the calculation. You feel it almost immediately. The warmth that was escaping from the crown of your head is now captured, held in the small space between the wool of the cowl and the surface of the scalp. A microclimate of warmth generated by your own skull and now retained instead of lost. It is a small thing. It is also, in the context of the dormitory in January, a significant thing. The difference between a heat budget that is marginally in deficit and one that is marginally sufficient. You tuck the cowl under your chin and you adjust the blanket, and the cold is still there, but it is further away than it was, held at a distance by this small additional layer. You begin to drift. Not into sleep yet. The body is not ready for sleep yet, still attending to its thermal situation, still doing the small adjustments and calculations, but into the country near sleep, the narrowing of attention that precedes the withdrawal into sleep, the thoughts becoming less linear and less purposeful, the psalms from Compline surfacing as they always surface in this state, the antiphons phrases moving through the loosening mind without being directed anywhere. This is the beginning. This is the beginning of what will become, if you stay and the years pass, the deep and reliable sleep of the adapted monk in his adapted body, in his adapted dormitory. The beginning is uncomfortable, and the end is not uncomfortable. And the middle, the years in which the body is finishing its calibration, settling into its new set point, making its peace with the stone and the single blanket, is the middle, which is what most of the monastic life consists of, the long, undramatic middle between the beginning's difficulty and the end's ease. The dormitory breathes. You breathe. The cold is there. You sleep. Fire banked low through the night. Even a fire banked low through the night, even a modest fire, would raise the dormitory's ambient temperature by several degrees, enough to change the experience of sleeping in it from the experience of a cold room to the experience of a cool room, which is a meaningful difference for a body trying to sleep. The fireplace in the dormitory would cost something to build and something to fuel. But monasteries are not poor institutions in the centuries of their prosperity, and the fuel for a modest dormitory hearth is not beyond the means of a community that heats its chapter house and its warming room, and its kitchen and its infirmary without apparent strain. So why not the dormitory? The answer is in the rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century in Italy by a man whose experience of cold was the experience of a central Italian climate rather than the experience of Yorkshire in January, but whose understanding of the spiritual logic of the monastic life was clear enough that it governed the practices of communities across 6 centuries and 3,000 miles from the conditions he wrote in. The rule does not say the dormitory must be cold. It does not prescribe cold as a spiritual discipline. What it says is that the dormitory must be simple, that the beds shall be straw pallets and single blankets. And what it presupposes, in its silence on the subject of heating, is the Mediterranean assumption that a roof over the sleeping body is sufficient shelter from the night. This was not the case in England. The Norman monks who came to England in the decades after 1066 and built their enormous stone buildings on the banks of English rivers and in English valleys and on English cliff F-tops brought with them the rule's provisions as interpreted through a century of Carolingian practice. Practice developed primarily in the milder climates of northern France, and they applied those provisions to a climate that the rule had not anticipated, The result was a tradition of dormitory cold that was not a deliberate spiritual choice. Nobody sat down and decided that monks should be cold in order to purify their souls, but an inherited practice applied to conditions it had not been designed for and slowly modified over generations through the accumulation of pragmatic adjustments that the rule's silence permitted without quite endorsing. The silence of the rule is important. When the rule does not address something, it leaves space for the customs of the house, the interpretations of the chapter, the dispensations of the abbot. The rule does not address the dormitory's temperature. Therefore, the dormitory's temperature is, in principle, a matter for the community to determine within the spirit of the rule's provisions. In practice, this means that different communities, in different centuries, in different climates, made different decisions, and the full range of medieval monastic sleep includes not only the unheated stone dormitory of the strict Benedictine house, but also the individually heated cells of the Carthusians, the modified arrangements of communities that built their dormitories over kitchen undercrofts, and the various other solutions that human ingenuity applied to the problem of sleeping in stone buildings in northern latitudes. But the unheated dormitory is the dominant solution for most of the period. Within that dominant solution, the monastery provides one specific concession to the cold that the dormitory does not provide, and this concession is the warming room. The warming room, the calefactorium in the Latin of the documents that describe it, the word already telling you what the room is for, is the single space in the monastery where warmth is the explicit purpose, where a fire burns not to cook food or heat water or dry laundry, but specifically to warm the people who enter it. The warming room in a Benedictine monastery is typically positioned in the east range of the cloister, often below the dormitory, sometimes adjacent to it, always accessible from the cloister walk, so that the brothers can enter it directly from the outdoor cold of the cloister, without passing through the inhabited rooms of the monastery. The fire in the warming room is not a small fire. This is the thing about the warming room's fire that distinguishes it from the scriptorium hearth or the infirmary fire. It is the fire whose only job is warmth, and it is built accordingly. The warming room fire is a generous fire, a fire built in the morning by the monk assigned to the task and maintained through the morning and afternoon at the level that the room requires to do what the room is for. The room fills with warmth as the day advances, the stone walls absorbing heat from the fire and radiating it back into the room in the way that stone absorbs and radiates everything. Slowly, persistently. The room's stone becoming over the course of the morning a secondary heat source. The stored warmth releasing through the afternoon, even as the fire's own intensity varies. You enter the warming room from the cold cloister. The transition is immediate and complete. Outside in the cloister, the cold of the January morning has been on your face since prime. The walk from the church to the scriptorium to the chapter house and back to the cloister, moving you through a series of spaces that are cold in different ways. The outdoor cold of the garth, visible through the arches. The indoor cold of the stone rooms. The covered cold of the arcade. And all of them sharing the character of air that has not been significantly warmed by anything other than the bodies passing through it. Of your breath condensing before the warm of your breath, condensing before the warm air dissolves it. You step inside. The fire is on the far wall, built into a stone fireplace with a chimney that draws the smoke up and out while the heat stays in the room. The fire at this hour already well established. the bed of coals beneath the burning wood deep and steady, the flame above it quiet rather than urgent, the fire doing its work without drama. The heat reaches you across the room before you have taken more than 2 steps, the radiant heat of a well-established fire reaching out into the space around it in the way that fire always reaches out, the wavelength of it finding the face and the hands and the front of the body before any other sensation has time to register. Your hands. Your hands have been in the cold since before dawn. The change is visible, and it is felt simultaneously. The color of the hands deepening from the pale pink of cold restricted circulation to the fuller pink of open capillaries. The blood returning to the surface tissues that the cold had partially evacuated, the surface warming, and the deeper warming following. The stiffness releasing as the temperature of the small joints rises above the threshold, where stiffness resolves into movement. The fingers uncurl. The grip that the cold had tightened opens. The hand that has been cold for 4 hours becomes within 5 minutes of the fire, something approaching its warm self. The rule allows the warming room for a specific period. Not all day. Not the warming room as a place of retreat from the cold building, as a permanent refuge from the January cloister. The warming room is available for a measured interval, typically twice a day. The morning session after terce and the afternoon session before vespers. Each session, perhaps, 30 minutes by custom, though the documents vary. In the scriptorium they have been over the vellum, the pen in the fingers at the particular angle that the fine work requires, the inkhorn warmed against the body before use, but cold again by the 3rd hour. The room's cold working continuously, on the hands that must remain still enough for precision, and therefore cannot generate through movement the warmth that movement generates. The hands by mid-morning in the January scriptorium are hands that are functioning at the lower edge of their capability. The fine motor precision of the penwork requiring warmth that the room is not providing. The small joints of the fingers stiff enough that the first strokes of the morning require more deliberate effort than the strokes of an afternoon when the hands have had time to warm in the room's marginal heat. These hands come near the warming room fire. The sessions are not explicitly timed in most communities. They are governed by the implicit understanding of what is enough. What is the sufficiency that the rule values? The warming that restores function without the indulgence that exceeds need. 30 minutes is enough. 30 minutes beside a good fire in a warm room restores what 4 hours of cold work removed. The hands that were stiff are supple again. The face that was cold is warm. The body whose core temperature had been maintained throughout. The body's core temperature is defended much more robustly than the extremities. The vital organs protected at the cost of the fingers and the toes and the ears and the nose is no longer attending to the cold as a primary condition, no longer committing metabolic resources to the maintenance of warmth, able to redirect those resources to whatever the afternoon requires. You leave the warming room and return to the cold. This is the rhythm. Warmth given, and then the cold returned to, the warming room's gift received, and then the building's ordinary cold resumed. The cold of the cloister after 30 minutes in the warming room is the same cold as before the warming room, the same temperature, the same January air, the same stone underfoot, but it is experienced differently, now experienced as the familiar condition returned to, rather than the difficult condition endured. The monk who leaves the warming room in the afternoon has been given something specific, something with a beginning and an end. And the cold on the other side of the warming room door is the cold that was there before and will be there tomorrow, and is what it always is: the condition. The Cistercians removed the warming room. In the earliest and strictest Cistercian constitutions, the warming room is one of the concessions to comfort that was identified as inconsistent with the poverty and austerity that the reform sought to restore. No warming room at Cito in the founding generation. The novice entering a Cistercian house in the early 12th century was entering a life without the warming room's provision, without the 30 minutes twice a day beside the generous fire, without the restoration of the cold, stiffened hands that the warming room provided. Later, they relented. The constitutions of the Cistercian order in the later 12th century include provisions for a warming room. The practical experience of living in Yorkshire and Burgundy and the limestone valleys of Central Europe having accumulated its evidence against the position that the warming room was a luxury. It was not a luxury. It was the provision that made fine handwork in winter possible, that kept the scriptorium productive through the cold months, that maintained the physical function that the life required, without which the life could not be fully lived. The warming room was restored, somewhat more restricted in its provisions than the Benedictine equivalent, but present, acknowledged. The cold of the winter monastery, given its one specific and official concession, and understanding why it is the dominant solution, not merely why it happened, but why it persisted, why communities, generation after generation, perpetuated a sleeping arrangement that was genuinely cold, requires understanding something about the monastic relationship to the body that is genuinely different from the relationship that the outside world carries. The monastery is, among other things, a school of the body. Not a school in the sense of instruction. Nobody teaches you in a formal classroom what to do with the cold, but a school in the sense of a system that produces, through consistent practice over time, a body that functions differently from the body it started as. The monastic body is a trained body. It is trained to rise at a specific hour, regardless of the quality of the preceding sleep, trained to hold a specific posture through the long hours of the office, trained to manage hunger at specific times of the year when the rule prescribes fasting, trained to work specific kinds of physical labor in specific conditions without complaint. The cold dormitory is one of the training conditions, the specific practice by which the body learns to sleep in cold as it learns to pray in cold, as it learns to kneel on stone floors in cold, as it learns in general that the conditions of the body are not the determining conditions of the life, that the life continues and the practice continues, and the of-vice continues regardless of what the body is reporting about its own comfort. This is a training, and like all trainings, it has an endpoint that is genuinely different from the starting point. The monk who has completed this training, not finished it because the training is the life and the life is not finished, who has been living inside the dormitory for 10 years and 20 years, carries in his body a relationship to cold that has no equivalent outside the institution that produced it. He does not carry it as an achievement or a pride, as evidence of his endurance. He carries it the way he carries the Psalms, as something so thoroughly learned that it has become part of the substrate of the self, the ground on which everything else stands, available without being noticed. Consider what the first winter actually costs the novice. The novice arrives, typically in autumn, specifically so that the community can assess the new member's commitment before the hardest conditions are faced. The autumn months being the months of reasonable weather, of harvest work, and of the settling into the community's rhythms. By November, the novice has been in the house for 2 months or 3. He knows the offices. He knows the scriptorium. He knows the refectory and the cloister and the chapter house and the church and the warming room. He knows the brothers by face and by their places in the choir. He thinks he knows the dormitory. He does not know the dormitory. The dormitory in the autumn is not the dormitory in the winter. The dormitory in October, when the first frosts are arriving and the nights are lengthening, but not yet at their longest, is cold in a way that is manageable without the full range of strategies the deeper winter will require. The first cold night that is genuinely cold. The first night when the straw tick seems inadequate and the blanket is clearly not enough, and the hood trick has been deployed and is helping but not solving. That first genuinely cold night arrives in November or December, and it is the night on which the novice learns something that the novice master's words could not have conveyed. That the cold of this room in this season is not a condition you endure your way through to the other side of. It is a condition you live in. It is the condition. The novice lies awake, and the cold is there, and it does not get better. Not that night. That night is the night the novice faces the reality of the choice that was made in good faith, but perhaps not in full knowledge. The choice to come here, to enter this life, this building, this dormitory. The cold is the reality of the choice made physical, the night's version of the same reality that the day version presents in the form of the hard kneeling and the early bell and the repetition of the offices and the silence and the obedience and the smallness of the cell and the reduction of the self that the whole arrangement requires. The night's version is the cold. It is the same message. Some novices leave after the first winter. They leave with the chapter's blessing and without shame. The rule is careful about this. Careful to distinguish between the man who was not called and the man who abandoned his calling. The discernment of the difference being the work of the year of probation that the rule requires before the novice makes his full profession. The winter is part of the discernment. A man who cannot accommodate the cold, who cannot find in himself the resource that the cold requires, who cannot stop attending to the cold long enough to attend to the office. That man is learning something about his relationship to this life that the summer months could not have taught him. Most novices stay. They stay, and the winter deepens, and the cold deepens, and the nights of January are the coldest nights of the year, the deepest cold of the shortest days, and the novice sleeps in this cold in the way he does everything else in the first year, imperfectly, consciously, with effort. The effort is visible in the mornings, in the face at the bell at Vigils, the face of a man who has been managing his own discomfort all night and is now being called to a further effort before the last effort is finished. The veteran brothers look like this sometimes too, in the deepest cold, the effort showing. But the quality of the effort is different. The veteran's effort is the effort of someone who has come through this before and is coming through it again, who knows what is on the other side of the January night, because January night comes every year, and every year the same thing is on the other side. The novice's November is the discovery. November is when the cold arrives in earnest, and the novice meets it for the first time as the full condition rather than the seasonal suggestion. The October cold was manageable, unpleasant in the way of early cold, which is the unpleasant of a body that has not yet adjusted its baseline and still reads the night temperature as an interruption of the warmer baseline it remembers from September. But November is different. November in the dormitory is the cold that has arrived and is settling in for months. The cold that will not break before March. The cold that the body in its October optimism might have believed would relent, and that in November gives up relenting. The novice learns the cowl in November. He learns it the way everyone learns everything in a new environment, by feeling the problem and then finding the solution. By waking at the bell at Vigils with the cold of his exposed head, making itself known. And then, that morning, or the next morning, pulling the cowl up before lying down and feeling the difference immediately. The cowl is the first discovery. The stockings are the second. The particular positioning of the body, the curl, the knees drawn up, the chin tucked, is the third, arrived at over several nights of waking from cold and adjusting and returning to sleep in a slightly better configuration. December is the month of consolidating what November taught. The body is still not adapted. Adaptation takes longer than 6 weeks. But it is learning the language of the cold, learning what the cold wants from it, and what it can infer in return. The first sleep of December is longer and deeper than the first sleep of November, the body falling below the surface more completely, the cold no longer managing to maintain the shallow alertness that kept October's sleep interrupted and choppy. The cold is still there in December. The body has simply begun to treat it as given rather than as news. January is the hardest month. January is always the hardest month, in the first year and in every year after. January is the month when the cold has been present for 3 months and has become the entire world, when the memory of warm mornings is far enough away to have lost its credibility as a thing that actually happened, when the prospect of spring is far enough ahead to be theoretical rather than felt. The dormitory in January has the quality of permanence that the body was warned about and is now experiencing from the inside. The cold of the stone, the cold of the floor, the cold of the air above the blanket, all of it exactly the same as November's cold, but experienced now as though it has always been this way and will always be this way. The cold without context. The veteran knows better. The veteran has been through January before, has felt its permanence feeling, and has known it for what it is. The seasonal illusion, the late winter conviction that the condition will not change. The veteran lies down in January with the knowledge that this cold has always ended and will end again, that March is coming, whether or not March is imaginable from here. He carries this knowledge not as a consolation he must remind himself of, but as a fact the body has verified enough times to trust without verification. The cold ends. It always ends. The novice does not yet know what is on the other side. He will know by spring. The veteran knows this the way the novice cannot yet know it, that the cold is real and the relief is real, and both are part of the same life. The life that moves through all the seasons inside the same stone walls. The cold and the warmth part of the same year that the offices are part of. The years turning as integral to the life as the Psalter's rotation. The cold is not an aberration or an imposition. It is January. January is part of the year. The dormitory in January is the year's January face, the specific version of the room that this month produces. And in February, it will be different, and in April, it will be different again, and in July, it will be different again, and next January, it will be exactly this, exactly the same cold, in the same stone room, with the same blanket, and the body that has been through the cycle once will enter the second January, with the knowledge that the cycle ends, that February follows January the way Lord's follows Vigils, reliably, every time. The spring comes, and the dormitory warms, and the cold that was the defining condition of the sleeping life reveals itself as seasonal, not permanent, the constant that turns out to be a variable, the condition that passes. The novice lies down in April in the same room on the same pallet with the same blanket, and the room is different. Not warm, not the warmth of summer. The summer dormitory in July and August can become almost uncomfortable. The stone that spent 4 months radiating cold into the room, now radiating the stored warmth of the spring sun back out through the night in a reversal of its winter work. But not cold. Not the cold of February. The same room. A different season. The body that has spent 5 months managing the cold now lies down, and the cold is not there. And the relief of its absence is a specific and complete thing. The relief of a pressure removed, of an attended to condition that no longer requires attention. This relief is the other side of January. Now consider what the dormitory is made of. Not the materials, the stone and the timber and the lead or thatch above, but the shape, the dimensions, the specific form that the builders gave it when they built it. Because the form of the dormitory is itself an argument about how to sleep in cold, an architectural answer to the same problem the blanket is answering, the problem of the single body needing to be warm in a cold building. The dormitory is long, typically much longer than it is wide, a rectangular room of considerable length. In the La Guerre monasteries, 150 feet, 200 feet, the full length of the east range of the cloister, but relatively modest in width, perhaps 30 feet. This proportion is not arbitrary. A long, narrow room with sleeping bodies arrayed along its length in 2 rows is a room in which the bodies are close together along the long axis, in which the warmth generated by one body's metabolic output has a reasonable chance of reaching the bodies on either side of it before it is lost to the cold air above. A wide, square room with bodies scattered across it is a room in which each body is an island. its warmth dispersed into the surrounding cold before it reaches anyone else. The long, narrow dormitory is a room shaped for collective warmth, the bodies in it arranged like the logs in a woodpile, each one contributing to the thermal mass of the group collectively warmer than the individuals separately. The bodies are the heating system. This is the literal truth of the unheated dormitory. The human bodies sleeping in it are the only source of warmth, and the room has been shaped to make the best use of them. The calculation is not made explicitly in any architectural document. The builders did not write down the body heat equations that determined the dormitory's proportions, but it is made nonetheless, embedded in the tradition of building these rooms, in the accumulated experience of builders and abbots and novice masters who had all slept in dormitories and knew from the inside what form worked and what form did not. The ceiling height is part of the calculation. A high ceiling in the dormitory increases the volume of cold air above the sleeping bodies, the air that the body's warmth must heat before it can make any difference to the bodies themselves. A lower ceiling contains the warmth more efficiently, keeps it closer to the bodies that generate it, reduces the volume that must be heated before the benefit is felt. The dormitory ceilings of most medieval monasteries are lower than the church nave's ceiling and lower than the chapter house's ceiling, both of which have their ceiling heights determined by the need for acoustic resonance in one case and architectural statement in the other, because the dormitory's ceiling height is determined by a different need, the need to sleep in a room that is not unnecessarily cold. The roof is the final layer. Above the dormitory ceiling, in the attic space and in the roof structure itself, is the insulating mass of the building's outer envelope, and the quality of this insulation varies considerably between communities and centuries. A stone vault covering the dormitory, the tunnel vault of a Romanesque building, provides better insulation than a timber ceiling open to the roof, the mass of the stone above slowing the loss of heat from the room below. Lead roofing above the stone vault provides a weatherproof outer layer that also has its own thermal properties, the lead conducting cold less readily than thin timber. Thatch, where it appears in the less grand buildings, provides the best insulation of any common roofing material, the trapped air in the straw doing its work as effectively on a monastery roof as on a peasant cottage. The window is the enemy. Of all the surfaces in the dormitory, the window is the one most directly in communication with the outside world, the one that offers the least resistance to the passage of cold from outside to inside. In the summer, the window is the room's most welcome feature. The light, the air, the breeze on a hot night. In January, the window is the dormitory's principal vulnerability, the gap in the stone envelope through which the January night does most of its work. The Benedictine dormitory window is typically a narrow lancet, the tall, thin, pointed arch that is one of the signatures of Romanesque and early Gothic construction, set high in the wall, intended to admit light while minimizing the area of exposed opening. Narrow and high is the right answer to the window problem in a cold climate. The narrow width reduces the area, which reduces the heat loss. The height places the window's cold air above the level of the sleeping bodies. The cold air that enters through gaps in the shutter, sinking to the floor rather than falling directly onto the occupied pallets below. The shutter fits the window. The wooden shutter, fitted to the interior face of the lancet and held closed with an iron bar or wooden peg, is the dormitory's primary defense against the January night. A well-fitted shutter that closes flush against the stone of the window reveal, with no gaps at the edges and no warp in the wood that creates a space for the wind to enter. Such a shutter is a real barrier to the cold, slowing the exchange of inside and outside air to a very slow seepage through the wood grain rather than the free flow of an open window. A poorly fitted shutter, warped, loose, with gaps that the decades of use have opened up between the wood and the stone, is something very different. A cold draught flowing through every gap, spreading across the floor of the dormitory in the slow chill of moving cold air that reaches the sleeping bodies as a specific and unpleasant sensation. The dormitory has a dozen windows and a dozen shutters, and no two shutters fit their windows in exactly the same way. And the monk who has been sleeping in this room for 10 years knows which shutter is the problem, and which pallet is in the direct path of its particular draught, and has arranged his sleeping position accordingly. The knowledge of the dormitory's thermal map as personal and as intimate as the knowledge of a familiar landscape. This knowledge is part of what is lost when the experienced monks die. The institutional memory of a monastic community includes, alongside the liturgical memory of who sings which part at which office, and the agricultural memory of which field needs what rotation, the thermal memory of the building, which corner of the dormitory is warmest, which window lets the most draught, which pallet is above the warming room's hearth, which part of the cloister walk is sheltered from the north wind, which stall in the choir gets the most warmth from the congregation's bodies in the coldest offices. This thermal map is not written down anywhere. It lives in the bodies of the brothers who have inhabited the building long enough to learn it, and it is transmitted informally, the way all experiential knowledge is transmitted in a community of practice, by the experienced showing the inexperienced. Your pallet is here. The window behind you is the difficult one. Take these blankets rather than those. The experienced brother's pallet is not near the difficult window. He has earned this. 20 years of winters earning him the right to the better position, the position that the rule does not officially recognize, but that the community tacitly understands. Seniority confers access to the less cold parts of the dormitory, not as a reward, but as an acknowledgement that the body which has adapted most completely can afford to occupy the less favorable positions, can manage what the newer body cannot yet manage, and therefore the newer body gets the warmer pallet, and the older body takes the window, except in the Cistercian houses, where the logic is reversed. The habit that the monk wears all day is the habit he sleeps in. This is not incidental to the question of warmth, but central to it, because the habit is not a light garment, and not a thin garment. The Benedictine habit is undyed wool, heavy wool, the weight of a winter coat in the terms of modern comparison, a garment designed for all-weather use in an unheated stone building. It has been on his body since before Vigils this morning. It has been warmed by his body through the offices and the work and the meals and the evening office, absorbing his body's warmth into its own fibers over the course of the day. And when he lies down at Compline, the habit he lies down in is already warm, warmed by him, shaped to him. The wool carrying his body's accumulated heat into the night. This is a more significant contribution to the night's warmth budget than it initially appears. A cold garment laid on a cold body in a cold room adds nothing to the warmth of any of the three things. The Cistercians, in whose constitutions the severity of the life is distributed as equally as the life allows, assign sleeping places by seniority in the opposite direction. The most senior monks take the least favorable positions as an act of humility. The elder brother giving the warmer pallet to the younger brother, not because the younger brother needs it more, but because the giving is part of what it means to be a senior member of this community. The gift of warmth offered as a spiritual practice rather than retained as a material comfort. This is the kind of distinction that only matters to people who are actually sleeping in the room. From outside, both systems produce the same outcome. The winter dormitory full of sleeping monks in cold. From inside, the difference is the difference between a system that organizes warmth as a resource to be managed and a system that organizes warmth as a practice to be offered. And this difference is not nothing in a life that attends carefully to the quality of its own intentions. The habit. A garment that has been worn warm all day and is placed around the same body in the same room provides an initial layer of warmth that is genuinely different from nothing, a warmth that slows the body's initial heat loss in the first hours of sleep, the hours when the body is moving from its waking temperature down toward the lower temperature of established sleep. The habit worn to bed is not the same as the habit taken of F and laid over the blanket as an extra layer. It is the habit with the body's own warmth already in it, the two things in an established thermal relationship that the cold of the room must work against from the moment the monk lies down. Add the scapula. The scapula, the long panel of cloth worn over the front and back of the habit, hanging from the shoulders to below the knees, adds its own layer over the core of the body, the chest and the belly and the back, the most important places to keep warm. The scapula is not removed for sleep. Like the habit it has been on the body all day, it provides its additional insulation, not because it has been designed as sleeping wear, but because it is a garment worn continuously, and continuously retains what the body puts into it. Add the cowl. The cowl is the hood, the deep, soft hood of the Benedictine habit that falls back when not worn and rises forward when the cold requires it. At night in the dormitory, the cowl goes up over the head and is tucked under the chin and becomes the most effective single piece of thermal management available to the sleeping monk. The head, as already noted, is the body's most productive radiator of heat. The skull's proximity to the surface and the density of blood vessels there, making it the place from which the most warmth escapes when unprotected. The cowl drawn over the head and tucked creates a small enclosed warm space around the skull and that changes the body's entire thermal calculation. The heat that was being lost to the room air now, retained and contributing to the warmth of the body below. The novice master says, "Always sleep with your cowl up." He says this in October, before the cold has arrived in full force, saying it as a preparation rather than an emergency measure. The novice who heeds this advice and forms the habit of it, before the cold is urgent, will find January different from the novice who discovers the cowl's effectiveness in December, after 3 weeks of inadequate sleep. Habits formed early are the easiest habits to keep. The cowl worn to bed from the beginning is the cowl that will be worn to bed in 20 years without thinking about it. without remembering a time when it was not part of the sleeping arrangement, the same way the words of the Psalms are worn in the mind. The accumulated repetition, making them available without effort. The stockings. The rule says nothing about stockings. The rule says very little about specific garments below the habit. It concerns itself with the habit as a whole, the outer expression of the life, without descending to the question of what the feet are wearing under it. In practice, the stockings are worn to bed because the feet at the end of the habit's hem are the body's most exposed extremity in the dormitory. The hem pulling up during sleep to expose the ankles and sometimes the calves. The cold finding the bare skin there, with the efficiency that cold always finds bare skin. Wool stockings pulled up to the knee and kept there through the night change what the feet feel in the morning. A monk who rises at the bell at Vigils with his feet already in warm wool stockings encounters the cold stone floor differently from a monk whose bare feet meet the stone before his eyes are fully open. The difference is not dramatic. The stone is cold either way. The floor in January is the floor in January. But the wool stockings provide those first 5 steps from the pallet to the passage with a layer between the foot and the stone that the bare foot does not have. And 5 steps on cold stone in bare feet is an efficient reminder of where you are and what the month is, while 5 steps in wool stockings is simply 5 steps. The rule allows a bolster. The bolster, the long cylindrical cushion placed at the head of the pallet as a pillow, is the rule's one concession to the pillow. The acknowledgement that the head raised slightly from the surface of the straw tick is preferable to the head lying flat on it, and the bolster's stuffing, straw again, or perhaps a little wool in the better, provisioned houses, provides its small elevation and its small insulation between the head and the surface below. The bolster is positioned against the cold. Specifically, in the colder positions in the dormitory, the bolster is placed between the sleeper's head and the direction from which the greatest cold comes, the wall, the window, acting as a small barrier, a buffer between the body and the coldest part of its environment. This is not a technique described in any rule. It is a technique arrived at by any sensible person who has spent a few weeks in a cold room and has noticed which direction the cold is coming from, and has placed the thing available to them between themselves and it, the pallet itself. Low wooden frames, 6 to 8 inches of the stone floor. The low-profile bed that raises the sleeper above the densest cold layer of the room's air, without raising him into the updraft of warm air that rises from the sleeping bodies and collects at the ceiling. The low bed is the right bed for this room. Above the floor cold, below the ceiling warmth, in the middle layer of a room that is, in its thermal stratification, a vertically graded space from very cold at floor level to least cold at head height. The straw tick laid on the low frame. The straw in the tick is not the straw of the field at harvest, not the long straw of a freshly cut sheaf. It is the chaff and the short straw, the material left after the grain has been threshed, the waste of the harvest made useful by the tick's containment of it. This material does not provide the softness of a feather mattress, or even the evenness of a wool-stuffed mattress. It provides the unevenness of compressed vegetation, a surface with lumps and hollows that the body learns to navigate over weeks and months, learning the particular geography of its own palette, the way it learns the geography of the cloister's flagstone path. but it provides insulation. The air trapped between the short straw fibres is the same insulation in principle as the air trapped in the thatch above, as the air trapped in the wool of the habit, the still air that does not conduct heat readily, that slows the passage of warmth from the body to the cold surface below. A body lying on straw loses heat through its underside more slowly than a body lying on bare boards. The difference is a matter of degrees, a few degrees measured over hours, but a few degrees over many hours is the difference between the first winter's cold and the second winter's less cold, the cumulative product of small provisions, each doing their modest part. On the pallet, in the habit, under the blanket, with the hood up and the stockings on, and the bolster positioned between the head and the window. The monk sleeps. He sleeps as well as the cold allows, and the cold allows better sleep than you would expect from a room of this description, because the cold the room contains is not the cold of the open air. It is the cold of an enclosed space that has been breathing human warmth for hours, that has the thatch above it, and the stone walls around it, and the shuttered windows holding as much as shuttered windows hold, the cold attenuated and modified and slowed from what it is outside to what it becomes inside a room full of sleeping bodies, inside the structure of the building, inside the discipline of the practice. The bell rings at Vigils. You are rising from the pallet at 3 in the morning, or 2 in the morning, depending on the season and the house and the interpretation of the rule's provisions for the length of vigils and the time of its beginning. The winter vigils begins earlier in most houses than the summer vigils, the longer winter night providing more time between Compline and the beginning of the morning offices, the community permitted to sleep longer in the early part of the night before being called. But even with this accommodation, the rising for vigils is always in the deep of the night, always before the first suggestion of dawn, always in the darkest and coldest hour of the winter night. The cold floor meets the feet, and the feet remember. Every morning this is what the feet report. The floor is cold. The floor is the same cold as yesterday. The floor will be the same cold tomorrow. The floor is January. This report is no longer a surprise after the first week. It is a form of information, the morning's first factual statement. The cold under the feet telling you precisely where you are and what the conditions are with the directness of a thing that has no reason to soften its message. You dress in the dark. You are already substantially dressed. The habit, the scapula, the stockings, the cowl. But there are the sandals to be put on, the belt to be tied, the small adjustments that the night's horizontal hours have required to be corrected. All of this in the dark, by touch, and by the muscle memory of 100 or 1,000 previous mornings. The hands know where the sandal straps are. The hands know the belt's buckle. The sequence is so established that consciousness barely participates, the body performing its dressing routine while the mind is still surfacing from the depth in which it spent the first half of the night. Around you in the dormitory, the other shapes are rising. You hear them before you see them in the dark. The rustle of wool, the soft, heavy footfall of sandals on stone, the occasional suppressed sound of a man clearing his throat, and the sounds together have the specific quality of the dormitory at this hour. A collective rising that is also a collective silence. no one speaking, because the great silence that fell at Compline has not yet lifted and will not lift until after prime. The silence is not oppressive. It is familiar. It is the silence in which the community has always made this passage, the passage from horizontal to vertical, from sleep to office, from the private world of the pallet to the shared world of the choir. The night stair descends directly from the east range to the south transept of the church, built this way by every monastery architect in the tradition, because the logic of the connection is compelling. The shortest possible route from sleep to prayer, the bodies that must be in the choir at 3 in the morning, required to traverse as little unheated space as possible between the unheated dormitory and the unheated church. The night stair is itself unheated, a stone stair in a stone tower, cold in the specific concentrated way of enclosed vertical spaces in winter. But it is brief. The steps are worn in their centers by the generations of feet that descended them at this hour, the stone concave where the feet have always landed, and your feet find the concavities by the body's own knowledge, descending in the dark with the confidence of a path memorized. The church is colder than the dormitory. The dormitory is a room. Colder, perhaps, in the specific way of a large enclosed stone space that has been sealed through the night with no source of warmth in it, the doors shut, and the windows shuttered, and the cold working on the stone from outside, and the stone radiating it inward to the air, that has been slowly exchanging its warmth for cold, since the last fire in the sacristy went out hours ago. You enter the choir and find your stall, and the wood of the misericord is cold under your hands, and the stone of the floor is cold through the sandals, and the air you breathe is the air of a January church at 3 in the morning, which is the air of a stone box that has been full of nothing but cold for 6 hours. You sing. A room encloses, and what a room encloses, it also slightly warms with the accumulated breath and body heat of the people who have been in it, and the stone walls of the dormitory that were cold at Compline are marginally less cold at Vigils, because the bodies sleeping in the room have been warming the air for 3 hours. The church is not a room in this sense. The church is a vessel for the vertical, built to reach upward, the vaulted nave rising to a height that no body's warmth will ever meaningfully reach. The cold stone of the triforium, and the clerestory, and the vaulting above existing in a temperature that the candles in the choir barely affect, and the human bodies below have no effect on at all. The church at Vigils is as cold as it is at any other hour. This is the thing that is at once the most ordinary and the least ordinary about the monastic night. You stand in the cold in the dark, and you sing the psalms, the voices of the brothers moving across the choir in the antiphon, call and response, the Latin travelling up into the dark above the choir, where the stone returns. It's slightly changed, enriched by the resonance of the space. The single voice becoming something larger than a single voice, before the response takes it up. The cold does not silence the singing. The cold is the condition in which the office happens. Your breath is visible. each exhalation a small cloud in the cold air of the nave, the moisture of the warm air from your lungs condensing as it meets the church's cold. The choir full of the visible breath of 30 or 40 men, the evidence of the body's warmth inside the cold church, the warmth that the church cannot retain, but that the body keeps generating regardless. The psalms of Vigils are the night psalms. They are the psalms that address the dark, that speak from the place of darkness toward the light that will come, the psalms of endurance and of waiting, and of the faith that morning arrives, though it has not arrived yet. There is a specific quality to singing these psalms in the physical dark, in the literal cold, before the literal dawn, a quality that is not available at any other hour. The cold church at 3 a.m. is the physical fact that makes the office's words something more than words, makes the waiting for dawn a thing the body is also doing alongside the psalms that describe it. The office ends, and the community files out, back through the night stair, back to the dormitory, back to the pallets and the blankets, and the residual warmth of the first sleep still faintly present in the straw and the wool. You lie down, and the cowl goes back up, and the blanket settles, and the body that has been in the cold church for an hour wants the warmth of the pallet with the directness of wanting that precedes all decision. This is the second sleep. The second sleep is different from the first. The first sleep is the deep sleep, the sleep of a body that has been awake since before Vigils yesterday and has worked the full arc of the monastic day. The body pulling consciousness down below the surface quickly and completely. The second sleep does not close over anything. The second sleep is the lighter sleep, the sleep that remains aware of the cold in a way the first sleep was not, that registers the body's temperature and the room's temperature in a running background process that the first sleep would not admit. You are sleeping, but you are closer to the surface, available to disturbances that the first sleep would have absorbed. The brother across the room who coughs, the wind in the shuttered window, the particular cold of this hour before dawn, which is the night's deepest cold, the temperature having fallen further from Compline to Vigils, and falling further still in the 2 hours from Vigils to Lords. The body responds without waking. The curl tightens, the knees coming closer to the chest, the arms pulling against the ribs. The configuration of the cold adapted sleeper deepening as the temperature deepens. This lighter resting is its own thing, not worse than the first sleep, not simply a diminished version of it. The second sleep of the monastic night has a quality that the single continuous sleep of the outside world does not have, the quality of a rest taken after a waking, a return to rest that knows itself as a return, the sleep that comes after the cold church, and the psalms, and the cold stair, and the cold floor, and the small warmth of the pallet refound. The bell rings at Lod's. You rise again. This is the night structure, the two-sleep rhythm that the offices impose on the monastic night, the rhythm that divides what the outside world experiences as a single sleep into two distinct portions separated by an hour or more of wakefulness, in the cold church singing the night office. This rhythm is the rhythm of the monastic body from its first week forward, and the body adapts to it the way it adapts to the cold, not quickly, not fully at first, but over time, the divided sleep becoming the normal sleep, the waking at vigils becoming the expected waking, the two portions of the night having distinct characters that the sleeping body learns to move between without the full cost of full waking. The novice in October finds the two-sleep rhythm disruptive. The novice in October lies down at Compline, exhausted from the day, and falls almost immediately into the deep sleep of real exhaustion, pulled below the surface of consciousness before the cold has made its full case. And the bell at vigils pulls him back up from that depth in a way that costs something real. The full wrenching wake of a body dragged from deep sleep, the grogginess and the cold and the dark of the dormitory passage, the stumbling down the night stair in a state that is not entirely wakefulness. He says the office in this state. He returns to the pallet in this state. He lies in the shallower water of the after. Vigils rest, unable to reach the depth he was in before the bell, lying in the cold and the dark, and the proximity of sleep without fully entering it. And then the bell at lauds, and he rises. And this time the tiredness is less sharp, because the depth was less deep. The novice in his third winter finds the two-sleep rhythm simply the rhythm. The body, given a consistent pattern long enough, makes the pattern its own. The 3 in the morning waking that was in October a violent interruption is in December of the 3rd year simply the moment in the night when the bell rings, and the office is said, and the night continues. The body rises at the bell, not from the disrupted depth of the 1st October, but from a lighter layer, from the sleep that has learned to position itself so that the vigils bell is not a wrenching from below, but a lifting from just below the surface, an arrival at wakefulness that costs much less because the body has positioned itself in a layer from which the cost is lower. This is efficiency, not the efficiency of a machine. The body is never a machine, but the efficiency of a practice long practiced, the refinement of the skilled practitioner who has done the same task enough times that the task has ceased to be a problem requiring solving, and has become a movement requiring only the doing. Consider the Cistercians again. The Cistercians, whose rule is stricter than the Benedictines, and whose buildings are correspondingly more severe. No decorative carving in the Cistercian church, no polyphony in the Cistercian choir, no warming room in the earliest and strictest Cistercian constitutions, built in the places that express this severity. And the place where this severity is most legible is in the sleeping arrangements. No curtained bed for the Cistercian, not even the bed curtains that the wealthier Benedictine houses began to permit in the later medieval period, as a concession to the northern climate. No fur lining in the habit. The habit of undyed white wool with the black scapula, both in the heaviest weight the wool allows, and the single blanket, and the straw pallet, and the cold room. Fountains Abbey in the Rother Valley, a valley in the Pennines, chosen specifically for its remoteness and its difficulty. The Cistercian founders in 1132 arriving at this site in winter, living first in rough shelters, while they began the first stone buildings. The whole founding story, a story about choosing the hard place deliberately, about the valley in January being the right valley, precisely because it was not the warm, comfortable valley. The Fountains dormitory, when it was built, held over 100 monks and lay brothers. A dormitory 210 feet long on the first floor above the Undercroft, the largest monastic sleeping room in England. In the depth of a Yorkshire January in that dormitory, 120 sleeping bodies generate warmth. Not enough warmth to make the room warm. The room is too large for 120 bodies to warm. But the warmth of 120 sleeping humans, metabolizing through the night at the slow rate of rest, breathing their warm breath into the cold air, radiating their body heat outward in all directions, adds up to something measurable, something that the room's temperature would not contain without them. The dormitory with 120 bodies in it is warmer than the dormitory with 12 bodies in it. Not dramatically warmer, not warm enough to call it a different kind of cold, but warmer by the degrees that the bodies provide, the collective body heat of the community contributing to the room's thermal budget in the same way that the thatch above contributes, or the shuttered windows contribute, imperfectly, partially, but really. 120 bodies breathing together. The exhalation of 120 sleeping men is warm and moist, and it rises from the pallets and meets the cold air above the pallets, and some of it condenses on the cold surfaces of the windows and the upper walls, the moisture of breath becoming the frost on the shuttered lancets, the frost that the morning light finds on the inside face of the winter dormitory window. This frost is the evidence of the night's work. The bodies were here. The bodies breathed. The warmth of the breathing met the cold of the glass and the stone, and became this, a fern of frost on the winter window. The night's record of 120 bodies doing what bodies do in the dark. The frost melts when the shutters are opened in the morning. The shutters are opened in the morning, and the February light comes in, and the frost on the glass runs down in small rills, and the dormitory receives the morning with the same stone face it has always had. The pallets empty now, the blankets folded back, the room in its daytime condition, neither warm nor cold, in the specific way of the night, but simply cold in the general way of a stone room in February. This is the room you come back to at Compline. This is always the room you come back to. The same room, the same cold, the same blanket, the same negotiation between the body and the night. And every night it is the same negotiation. And every year the negotiation costs a little less, demands a little less conscious management, requires a little less of the mind's attention before the mind can release itself into sleep. By the third winter, the body has made its peace. Not with the cold. The cold is always there. But with the sleeping in the cold. With the particular arrangement that the cold requires. The habit, and the blanket, and the hood, and the straw, and the bolster, and the positioning, and the two-sleep rhythm, and the bell, and the rising, and the return. The body knows all of it, and does all of it without requiring the mind's direction, the way the hands know the quill after months in the scriptorium, and the throat knows the psalms after years in the choir. The body sleeps in the cold dormitory, the way the monk lives the whole life, not in spite of its difficulty, but through it. The difficulty not removed but inhabited, not solved but made the ground on which the rest of the practice rests. But not all monasteries solve the problem this way. There is the Carthusian solution. The Carthusians, founded by Bruno of Cologne in the late 11th century in the alpine wilderness of the Grande Chartreuse, a valley in the Chartreuse Massif in what is now southeastern France, remote, steep-sided, cold in the way of high alpine valleys, developed a form of monastic life that addresses the problem of sleep and cold differently from any of the communal solutions. The Carthusian monk does not sleep in a dormitory. The Carthusian monk sleeps in a cell, not the bare minimum of the hermit's shelter, but a genuine small house, a complete domestic unit with its own rooms and its own garden and its own covered walkway, connecting it to the cloister, the cell of the Carthusian charter house, a place in which a monk lives and sleeps and eats his daily meals alone, coming out only for the community offices and the communal meals on certain days. In the Carthusian cell, there is a fireplace. This is the element that distinguishes the Carthusian sleeping arrangement most fundamentally. In the cell, there is a small fireplace, and in the fireplace, there may be a fire, and the monk who sleeps in the cell sleeps in a room that has been heated by his own fire through the evening, and retains that heat through the night, in the way that a small heated room retains heat, slowly, imperfectly, but meaningfully. The Carthusian sleeps warmer than the Benedictine. The Carthusian constitutions do not pretend otherwise. The cell's fire is acknowledged as a provision appropriate to the Carthusian life, which is an extreme life in other ways that the communal Benedictine life is not. The monk who sleeps alone in a cell without the warmth of 40 other bodies around him needs something other than the shared warmth of the dormitory, and the cell's small fire is that something. But the Carthusian sleeps alone. This is the trade. Warmth bought at the cost of company. The heated cell purchased with the isolation of the solitary life. The Benedictine dormitory is cold, but it is warm with people. The warmth of 40 sleeping bodies and their shared breath, and the subtle comfort of the community's presence through the night. The knowledge that the ping on the next pallet is also rising at Vigils, and also returning to the pallet after Lord's, and is also lying in the same cold, under the same kind of blanket, in the same stone room. The Carthusian cell is warmer, but it is silent. The silence of a room in which one person sleeps, and that one person is alone with the fire and the cold and the night. Then there is the anchoress. The anchoress is sealed into a small stone cell, the anchor hold, built against the wall of a parish church, typically on the north side where the sun does not reach, with one window looking into the church and one window onto the street or the churchyard. And in this cell, she lives for the rest of her life. The sealing is literal. The ceremony by which the anchoress enters her anchor hold includes the formal closing of the door behind her, the bishop or his representative presiding over what the liturgy calls an enclosure. The anchoress who enters the anchor hold is dying to the world, and the world that she dies to includes warm rooms and company, and the freedom to move, and the freedom to be cold in the ordinary way of a person who can walk away from the cold. She cannot walk away from the cold. In the anchor hold in January, the cold is what it is for the duration of January, and the anchoress is in it with whatever the anchor hold provides. The anchor hold is small, perhaps 12 feet by 10, and small rooms are easier to heat than large ones. There is typically a fireplace or a brazier permitted, the church having made the practical determination that the body committed to a lifetime of prayer requires at minimum the ability to survive the winter. A fire in 12 feet by 10 feet of stone space, burning through an evening, raises the temperature of that space considerably, the stone walls absorbing the fire's heat and becoming supplementary radiators through the night, releasing stored warmth slowly into the small volume of air the anchoress breathes. The anchoress in her cell in January may sleep warmer than the monk in the Benedictine dormitory. Not because the anchor hold is better built, but because the fire and the room are matched in scale in a way that the dormitory fire could not match the dormitory. But she sleeps alone with no bell. The anchoress's night is her own, structured by the offices she says privately in her cell, rather than by the community bell that calls the dormitory to the choir. She does not rise at vigils in the sense that the dormitory monk rises at vigils, does not file down the night stair in a row of silent shapes, does not stand in the cold choir with 40 other voices. She rises alone and prays alone and returns to rest alone. The women who chose the anchor hold chose it, knowing what it was, knowing the cold wall, the small room, the long nights, the years of the same small space, and they wrote about it in the vernacular, in the practical manuals that the anchoritic tradition produced, texts unusual in the medieval record for their directness about the physical conditions of the life. The author of the novice, writing in the early 13th century, is candid about the physical demands of the enclosed life and matter of fact about the provisions that the body needs to meet those demands. She has learned the cold differently from the dormitory monk, alone, through her own body's encounter with it, without the company of others making the same calibration. But the end point is the same. The adapted body, the body that has been given its conditions long enough to stop reading them as problems, that sleeps in them with the ease of the long familiar. The ground is cold. The ground has always been cold. You lie down in the habit with the hood up and the cowl tucked and the blanket pulled to the chin, and the cold of the room is present, and the cold of the window behind you is present, and the cold of the stone floor 2 feet below the pallet is present. And none of these is a surprise. None of them is news. None of them requires from you anything more than the acceptance that they have always required. You breathe. The dormitory breathes around you. Outside the shuttered windows, the February night is doing what February nights do. Sharp-edged, star, cleared when the clouds permit. The temperature falling through the hours toward the deepest cold of the pre-dawn. The world outside the monastery walls, in its own version of the same negotiation between warmth and cold that you are conducting under your blanket. Inside the walls, the office will come, and the voices of the brothers in the antiphon, filling the nave above you. You will return to the pallet, and the hood will go back up, and the shallow sleep of the after. Vigils' rest will hold you until Lords, and Lords will come, and you will rise again, and the grey February light will be arriving at the east window, and the office of dawn will be said in the increasing light, and the night will be over. This night, this specific January night, in this specific dormitory, in this cold building, in this cold valley, the night is already moving toward that. You do not feel it moving. The night at its beginning has the quality of permanence that all long cold nights have, the quality of a condition that will not change, that has been here since Compline, and will be here until Lords, and will feel at 2 in the morning, as though Lords might be very far away. But the movement is happening. The movement is always happening. The night moving toward the bell, the way the seasons move toward the thaw. In the direction of the next thing, always in the direction of the next thing, even when the thing you are in feels permanent. This is what the veteran knows, and the novice is learning, that the night passes, that January passes, that the cold in the dormitory is real, and the cold is seasonal, and the season is part of the year, and the year is part of the life that was chosen, the life that is this dormitory in this cold, this blanket in this dark, this body adapted to this practice over this many winters, sleeping now as it will sleep tomorrow night, and the night after that, and the night after that, until it does not sleep here anymore. The dormitory breathes. You breathe. The bell has not yet rung. The stone holds its cold. The blanket holds its warmth. The night holds what the night holds.